Hey guys, this is Test 33 Game 2. This is the famous Birds in the Forest game. It's an in-out game, also known as selection. We're looking to see which of the birds are in the forest, which of the birds are not in the forest. So some are in, others are out. Now if you look at the rules, you'll see that we have the same variables featured in multiple rules. We've got H in the first rule and the second rule, G in the first rule and the third rule, and J in the second rule and the fourth rule. So these rules link together a great deal. So I'm going to write down each rule and its contrapositive and link things together as we go. So the first rule is if we have H, then we don't have G. Contrapositive, if we have G, then we don't have H. Now the second rule says J, M, or both, then H. So J requires H, also M requires H. Contrapositive, not H, then not J, and not H, then not M. Now, the or both here is redundant because in logic the word or already includes the possibility of both. Next rule is if W, then G. Contrapositive, not G, then not W. Finally, not J, then S. And the contrapositive, not S, then J. So that's every rule and its contrapositive linked together to form long conditional chains. Next, we'll go on to the questions. This is question number 6. So they're asking us for a complete and accurate list of birds that are out. Our chain treats in and out equally, so we can simply look through the chains that we've created to see which is a list of birds that could all be out together. Now each chain has 3 negatives. The top chain has S, G, W, bottom chain H, J, M. Now I'll recommend using the top chain here because S is spaced pretty far apart from both G and W, so we required all these links together in order to make that inference. So they're going to reward us for testing multiple rules simultaneously through the use of this inference. So any choice mentioning S out must also mention G out and W out, or else it is bad. A mentions S, yet does not mention G or W, so A is gone. B and C do not mention S, so we'll skip those for now. D mentions S, yet mentions both G and W, so we'll keep that for now. Finally, choice E mentions S, yet does not mention G and W, so E is gone. Next, we'll move forward on that chain. Any choice mentioning G out must also mention W out, or else it is bad. B and C both mention G, yet do not mention W, so they are bad, and they are eliminated, leaving D by process of elimination. Next, number 7. If both M and H are in, what must be true? Now, M in already requires H in, so they're being a little bit redundant here. We already know that M in requires H in, requires G and W to both be out. So I'm going to make a little in-out table here. M and H are both in, G and W are out. Now, J and S, we don't really know about those guys. I mean, at least one of them has to be in, because if you look at the chains, J out requires S in, S out requires J in, so at least one of those two must always be in. But as for the other one, well, that's on the fence. Could be in, could be out. We don't really know where that guy is going. He could go in as well, in which case we'd have both J and S in, or he could go out, in which case we would only have one of JS. So if we run through the choices to ask ourselves what must be true, we'll find that A is eliminated. S's do not have to be the only other birds in the forest. We could have J's be the only others, or we could have both J and S if this guy goes in. B, J's are the only other birds. Same thing. We could have J's be the only other birds, but we could also have S be the only other, or we could have both J and S. Next, C, neither J's nor S's. Well, that's impossible because due to their relationship, we always have to have at least one of those two in. If J is out, S is in. If S is out, J is in. We don't really know what's happening with those. It's like you draw a line here. We can only look forward. M in requires, H in requires, G out requires, W out. That's why S/J is on the fence here after all. At least 2 other kinds of birds? Well, we could have only one other kind, one of JS, and this guy could go out. So it doesn't need to be at least 2 others. Finally, E by process of elimination. At most 2 others. Yes, of course. Whether this guy goes in or not, we're not going to have more than 2 others in addition to M and H. We could have M, H, J, S, or M, H, S, J, because these are interchangeable, right? But G and W always have to be out. That's an initial inference simply from following this chain. So E is our answer. Next, number 8. If J's are not in the forest, what must be false? Well, if we look at our chain right here, we'll see that J out requires S in, and that's it. We don't know anything else regarding any of the other variables. So I put J out in the out column right here, requiring S in. Now, if they ask us what must be false, well, there's really only two things we know here. We know that J out requires S in, so if they're going to ask us about what must be the case, whether it must be true or must be false, it's going to have to be regarding one of these two guys. Now, they're not going to ask us about J's and say something like J in, because, well, that'd just be a stupid question. They just told us where J was in the question stem. Instead, they're going to ask us about S. And since we know S has to be in, it must be false that S is out. So, false, S out. That's what we know as a must, which is the only thing they're likely to ask us about. So run through the choices, looking for something saying S out. You scan through, only D and E mention S, and D mentions S out, whereas E mentions S in. S in, we don't really care about that. We know S out is a falsehood. So D is our answer simply from our initial prediction right here. Next, number 9. What is the maximum number of the 6 kinds of birds the forest could contain? Well, we saw back from question number 7, we could have had M, H, J, and S. Those 4 guys all could have been in. We knew that previously. So we can already eliminate 2 and 3 off the bat because we've seen 4 work. Now we should start from the highest number, 6, and work our way down. So could we ever have all 6? Well, of course not, because we know that there are conflicts, right? I mean, H in requires G out, G in requires H out. So because H and G don't get along, we're certainly never going to have all 6 of the birds, so E's eliminated. But what about 4 and 5? Why doesn't 5 work? I mean, we never saw it happen, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen. Well, there are a couple ways to prove this. One of them would simply be to look at the chains here. We see that, H in requires G out and W out. So having H in, we're not going to be able to have 5, because when you have H, you automatically lose at least 2. So let's put H out. If H is out, you lose H, J, and M. That's 3 things. So whether H is in or out, you're always going to lose at least 2 things, therefore maximum 4. Now, there's another way to prove it also. I'm going to make another little in-out table, because I like doing that. And we see that, we're always going to lose at least one of HG because they have a positive negative relationship. Whenever one is in, the other is out. Therefore, you always lose at least 1. On the other hand, J and S have a very different relationship. Their relationship is what I call negative arrow positive. Negative arrow positive. When one is out, then the other is in. We're ending on a positive note, so we're going to be forced to have more things in. So I'm going to put J/S in the in column. Now, what haven't I talked about? Well, W and M. What kind of relationship do they have? Well, M in requires W out, and W in requires M out. Therefore, we're always going to lose at least one of those 2 because the relationship ends on a negative note. M is negative here, W is negative here, ending on a negative note, forcing more things out. So you see here, we're always losing at least 2 things, one of the HG pair, one of the WM pair, losing at least 2 things from a total of 6. Therefore, we can't ever have 5. Our maximum is actually 4. Next, number 10. What pair of birds cannot be both in the forest? So what pairing of birds can we never have both, meaning we always lack at least 1? So we're referring here, like I said, to a positive arrow negative relationship, such as HG. When one's in, then the other's out. When one's in, then the other's out. Therefore, we always lose at least one of those 2. So we're looking for a pairing of variables in the choices here, A through E, where we lack at least 1, where they have a positive negative relationship. So looking at A, JW, well, J is positive here, and it's followed by negative W. Positive J, followed by negative W. It's a positive negative relationship. So yes, we can never have both of those, and A is our answer. I'll run through the others here just for good measure, though. B, J, and S, they have a negative arrow positive relationship, ending on a positive note, forcing more things in. If you remember back from number 7, we could have had both J and S when we had M, H, J, S. So J and S can both be in together. It is possible because it ends on a positive note, giving us more things. So B's gone. C, WS. W actually requires S. You see W positive leads to S positive, so of course they could certainly both be in. D, J and M. Well, J and M actually don't really have a relationship. I mean, M requires H, J requires H, but M does not require J. That's going backwards, not allowed. M only requires H and G out, W out. M does not impact J, and J does not impact M. So D is gone. Next, E, M, and S. Again, no relationship. M leads to H to not G to not W. S leads to, well, nothing. S is really weak. So M and S have no relationship. One in does not force the other out. As you remember from number 7, we could have had M, H, J, and S. That is both M and S in that scenario. So yes, E is bad as well, leaving A by elimination in case you did not get it the first time around. Next, number 11. If G is in, what must be true? So we can make another little in-out table if you like. And we see that G in requires H out, J out, M out, and S in. So I'm going to put G in the in column, H, J, M in the out column, and S is in the in column. Now what's happening with W? Well, W is basically on the fence. We don't know which way it's going. It could go in if it wants, or it could go out if it wants. Doesn't really matter. G leads to all of these things, H out, J out, M out, S in, but does not impact W. Look at which way the arrow is pointing. It doesn't go backwards. G can't go the wrong way on a one-way street. W requires G, but G does not require W. That would be going backwards on an arrow, which is not allowed. So let's run through the choices. A, S's are in the forest. Look, we got that right there. We're good. A is our answer. Now, if you want to look at the others, we could do that just for good measure. W's in. Again, W's on the fence. We don't know which way it is going. B is gone. C, both W and S. Again, we do know that S has to be in, but as for W, we really can't say. W could be with G, but it might not. Interesting to note here that C can't be a valid answer simply because if C were a must, then both A and B would be musts as well, and we certainly cannot have 3 correct answers. That would be a bad question. So C is gone. D, at most 2 kinds. Well, we got to have at least 2 kinds, G and S, but we could have W as well if W wants to go in. We don't know. So D is gone. E, at least 3 kinds. Well, W could be in which case we'd have 3, but does not have to be, in which case we would only have 2. So we could have at most 3 G, S, W if W goes in, but we do not have to have at least 3. We could have only 2. So E is gone, leaving A by process of elimination. Next, number 12. If we add a new rule that if S is in, then H is out. And of course, we need to add the contrapositive as well. If H is in, then S is out. Now, whenever they add a new rule to the game, they will do so in the final question of the game, so we can feel free to mess with the main diagram at this point as much as we want to. So S in, arrow H out. Now, I actually like to loop this arrow back around so that we see the full impact of what results. So S in requires H out requires J out and M out, and requires S in. So S actually leads to H out, J out, M out now, whereas previously S led to nothing at all. I'm also going to do the contrapositive. H in requires S out. So H in leads to S out, leads to J in. So lots of new inferences to be derived by looping that arrow back around and simply following the arrows in the direction in which they are pointing. At this point now, we can simply treat this like a regular could-be-true question. So, could we have both J and S? Well, I've been beating you over the head with this whole idea all throughout the game that J and S could both be in, but remember, that was under the previous state of affairs before we added these 2 rules right here. So, actually, we got to evaluate this as if it's completely new. So, S in requires H out, requires J out. Look at that. S, loop back around, H out leads to J out and M out. So S actually requires J out. They can no longer both be in, and A is gone. Next, B, both W and S. Follow W in requires S in, just like it did before. The new rule has no bearing on the W-S relationship, so we are good on that, and B is our answer. I'll go through the rest though. Both M and S in leads to H out, leads to M out. So S in actually requires M out. Same thing on the other chain. M in leads to H in leads to S out. So C is gone. D. J's are out, whereas M's are in. J out leads to S in, to H out, to M out. So J out indirectly leads to M out. So we cannot have J out while having M in. D is gone. E. Only 2 of the 6 are not in. Well, previously, back from question number 9, we could have had a max of 4, which would have been a scenario in which we had only 2 out. But now this new rule about S in requiring H out, H in requiring S out, that new rule actually imposes a new positive S, arrow, like negative J relationship, for example, reducing the number of things we could have in. So remember from before, we had this general in-out diagram I used for number 9 to prove the maximum possible number in. H/G, at least one of those guys is out. J/S, at least one of those guys is in. And W/M, at least one of those guys is out because they have a positive negative relationship. Now, S in leads to H out to J out, so we can actually add on a new S/J out relationship right here on this diagram, showing at least 1, 2, 3 things out from a total of 6, because we must lack at least one of the HG pair, at least one of the WM pair, at least one of the SJ pair. So at least 1, 2, 3 things out from a total of 6. Therefore, we gotta lack at least 3 things at all time. We can never lack only 2. So E is bad, and B is our answer, in case you didn't get it before.